All right, time to check in with Tom Mulcair, a feature brought to you by the folks at Guaranteed Industries, reminding you their Lennox Fall promotion. Time running out. You want to take advantage of that now. Get ready for the colder weather. Give them a call, 514-342-3400, or online, guaranteedindustries.com. They are a Lennox Premier dealer. Tom, can we start with this story on Chinese interference in the Canadian election? I saw the Prime Minister looking pretty uncomfortable talking about this yet again today. What's the story here?
I think that Mr. Trudeau is doing his best not to tell the whole truth. I think that's the best way to say it. You know, whenever you see somebody on a TV show or in a real courtroom, they're always asked if they're going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I was watching the way Mr. Trudeau's been parsing his sentences so carefully since the beginning of this thing, because he doesn't want anybody to ever be able to say that he didn't tell the truth. But it's clear that there are parts of this that are not coming out. I think it's manifest to anybody who's followed the file that the Chinese government, I always have to try to remind myself not to say the Chinese because we're not talking about people, we're talking about a government. The Chinese government is clearly wielding its power, flexing its muscles all over the world, including in Canada. And they see democracy as a weak link. They just say, well, this election stuff is pretty easy to go after, and that's what they've been doing. And that's exactly what Trudeau's team said that he had talked about with President Xi. So for him to be spinning around now and saying, well, you know, I didn't really know, and didn't know then, there's something that doesn't quite add up in Mr. Trudeau's way of explaining it. Is he trying to save relations with China after that rather aggressive retort from President Xi? Perhaps. But he looks weak right now after having looked quite strong when he did stand up to Xi.
All right. So I don't know. We're going to find out a whole lot more about this or when people get tired of asking him that question. But meanwhile, the never-ending Emergencies Act trial or investigation, whatever we're calling it, just goes on and on. It seems to me, Tom, like every minister at some point is going to have to show up for this thing.
It's about to end. I mean, it's got a couple of days left. The most the most salient part of the last couple of days has been a couple of set-tos between the conspiracy theories being spun by the lawyer for the truckers and the people who are involved in that so-called convoy, because he's convinced that there was a false flag maneuver by somebody, and he identified, he gave a name, and the person in question, who pretty serious guy who works for another outfit, he was being accused of providing a front for the Liberal government to use the Emergencies Act, and he very, very politely but very firmly pushed back and said, I am a conservative. I am a longtime conservative donor. I'm not in the business of trying to help the Liberals. I was 500 kilometers away when this thing happened. And that's what happens when you spin conspiracy theories, because it was a third-hand bit of information. One of the guys who had been there the day that a Nazi flag showed up said, I can tell you that this guy was, and I'm not even going to mention the guy's name because he did absolutely nothing wrong. And he said, it's this guy from this association. But it wasn't him at all. It's impossible what they're saying. The guy hadn't been in Ottawa in 3 years. So this is the madness that you're going through. Now he was digging in his heels. He wanted the government to give him the identity of the person who was driving the truck with the Confederate flag. No, the government doesn't have to provide you with any such information. And you're just, again, trying to spin a conspiracy theory that, that Nazi flag, and that Confederate flag, this was all part of a maneuver by the government to make the truckers look bad. And this is where they've wound up at the end of this thing. I think it's a clear victory for Trudeau and the government and their ability to prove, yes, there was nothing left to do but to bring in the Emergencies Act, and I think they're right on that.
Well, there was the story today because David Lametti was there being questioned, right? And at some point, they'd found a text that he had sent to another minister, I guess to Marco Mendocino. Suggesting that the chief of police, before he stepped down, Peter Slowly, was basically not doing a good job, almost suggesting that they tell him what to do.
Well, what he does say is that he is incompetent. That's pretty hard to argue with, because he actually had to step down because he was incompetent. There was part banter in all of that, and I think that Lametti gave a pretty good accounting of himself, and he just simply, he was truthful, and he said, look, this is banter between friends, because at one point he says, maybe we should think of the army. And he said, do you think we should ask Anita Anand how many tanks we need? And he goes, I think we'd only need one. You can just imagine, you and a friend having that sort of conversation. In other words, bring in one tank and they're going to disassemble and they'll leave. So I think at the end of the day, most people will understand that That's, at a tense moment, an exchange between colleagues. And good on them. It also shows openness and transparency for them to put that sort of information on the table. I don't think it's going to change anything in the result. I don't think that it makes the government look badly at all.
It's funny. I remember, Tom, when this started, or maybe a few days in, I'd asked you at one point, what is all this going to achieve? I mean, it's not turned into a circus, but it's getting a little strange now, especially with that government, with the lawyer, rather, for the truckers, actually being asked to leave chambers, which is kind of crazy.
No. Sorry, I want to correct you. The judge said, I'm getting up to leave.
Yes.
He looked at the people in charge of security and said, I would like security to make sure that he's no longer in this room when I come back. So he actually had him expelled from the room, which is not a very good thing when you're a lawyer. I mean, here in Quebec, it would be the Bar Association that would be drumming its fingers at the disciplinary committee waiting to have a little chat with you. And you can be sure that the Law Society of Upper Canada is going to be wanting to do the same thing.
Yeah. He just looked like he kept wanting to get kicked out of that room. I'm sorry.
Well, of course. I mean, I had the exact same impression. He's going to plead, no, I was just defending my client's best interest. But when you're this far into the thing and you haven't managed to establish any of your conspiracy theories, well, then you're going to, start trying to make a show of the thing. And that's exactly what I think he was up to at that point.
I started to say, when I asked you originally, what will come of all this? And you said, now you think the government is actually going to come out okay. It'll be what? It'll be a matter of someone deciding, oh, yeah, you should have called or should have invoked the Emergencies Act when you did, or no, you didn't, and what lesson will we have learned from this?
Well, I think that what Rouleau is going to come up with is, the standard thing, 28 recommendations. And in the future, they'll be called the Rouleau directives. And you can be sure that what we'll have is a long series of things. The government has to consider this. Has it used every possible resource? And has the police been allowed to do its job? Has it been doing it properly? Have other, options been considered? That sort of thing. Because the Emergencies Act, if you look at it at the highest level, it goes all the way back to the War Measures Act being brought in the 1970 October crisis. And that was something that really stained Pierre Trudeau's record, for having brought them in at the time. Everybody here in Quebec was, or just about everybody, was in agreement with it. But, it became quite controversial in hindsight. So they said, okay, we're going to come up with a new statute. So in the 1980s, they sat down, cobbled this thing together and said, it's not going to be the same. It's going to be different criteria, and it's going to be harder to be able to invoke. At the end of the day, Aaron, I still don't see what a single police force in Ottawa, or even with the OPP, should have been able to do. When you look at the people on the front line, there's a whole bunch of them who are in green uniforms, and those are the Sûreté du Québec. You were able to bring in the RCMP, the OPP, the Sûreté du Québec, the Ottawa Police, and a lot of others. CSIS was in there as well, and just make sure that this thing went smoothly, and it did. So I think that they're going to be measured in part by the result. And yes, they'll say, if things had been properly, especially by the Ottawa Police at the highest level, maybe we would have avoided this, but when it got to the stage that it was at, there was no other option on the table.
Final thing that I want to bring up today, Canadian members of Parliament passing a unanimous motion condemning FIFA's decision, not Qatar's, FIFA's decision to threaten on-field punishment if soccer players dared wear that armband in support of the LGBTQ community. And again, I want to specify this is FIFA, the governing body, not the country of Qatar. But, kind of a hollow point to this. What was the point of doing this?
It's symbolic, but I also think it's important because Parliament, of course, is expressing its own will. The government has its will, but the government will be sending ministers there. I was able to catch a good part of your conversation with some of our listeners earlier, and some of them were expressing dismay. You know what it reminded me of, Aaron, what we went through, during the summer? Canada correctly said that there are war crimes being committed by Russia. We correctly said that it amounts to genocide. We've imposed sanctions, and all of a sudden we lifted the sanctions. Oh, and on Russia Day, we sent in people from Global Affairs to have caviar and vodka with the Russians to celebrate Russia Day. So we're full of these contradictions. We're sending in ministers, but we've just had this unanimous resolution in the House of Commons. I think that that's an expression of the will on behalf of all Canadians. You know what? Given their record on these things, sure, we're going to play soccer, but no, we shouldn't be sending anybody from the Canadian government. And yet Mr. Trudeau did just that. And at the same time, he wants to show how close he is and supportive of LGBTQ rights by going on a TV show called Drag Queen. But he's still sending in one of his ministers and I'm not sure he's ever going to be able to explain the two.
Oh, yeah, and that was the question, part of the question I asked Tom, which was this idea that, if we had not sent, there are two ministers actually in Qatar for this World Cup, and there's another event tied to it. We did this in Beijing. We refused to send, to basically legitimize China by sending diplomats. Why did we do it in Qatar?
I don't understand either. I just find it incomprehensible because Mr. Trudeau does like to stand on these questions of principle.
Yeah.
But then the minute something happens that pushes him slightly, he goes back on it. A little bit like our initial conversation today about the China thing. Stands up strong to Xi, says, don't stick your nose in my elections. We're a democracy. We know you don't understand what that is, but for us, elections are sacred. And then all of a sudden, I didn't really know about it. What's going on here? Help me out. No, nobody ever talked to me about it. There's something that doesn't add up. There's this high standing principle, high horse, strength, determination, and then the minute there's the slightest bit of wind, he blows like folds like a cheap suit.
And we will leave it at that. Tom, thank you very much.
Take
Appreciate
care.
it.